Welcome to the next episode of the Urban Gardener podcast. I am Josh Campbell, your host, along with my colleague Julia Laughlin, and we are here to help you turn up your gardening knowledge with timely tips and tricks for gardening in the urban setting. And so we are still new to this podcasting thing and trying to be timely about it. We are here with a different segment than our monthly tips that we are providing, but we're going to talk specific about a topic that may be relevant for gardeners as they're getting into their summer gardening and thinking about ways that they can be productive as vegetable gardeners this summer. And so Julia, tell us a little bit about what we want to talk about today.
Well, to me, Josh, it seems like when people are first trying to get into gardening, they look at that spot in their backyard and they think, oh my gosh, I just don't even know where to begin. Like I have a backyard, and I was at someone's backyard this morning looking at it with them, and it's like I want a garden, but where do I start? So maybe when you're just beginning, instead of just jumping off and having this not so incredible experience with gardening, why not try something above ground like container gardening and kind of take a small bite out of the elephant and see what it feels like to try some things in pots before you get started. And then I thought we'd also talk a little bit about Strawbed gardening.
Yeah, I always think about container gardenings as an option for folks who maybe have really poor soil conditions. Or I know when I was first married, we were renting a home and there were limited things that I could do to actually work in the ground or even build permanent or semi-permanent raised beds. And so growing in fabric or potted containers was basically the only option I had available to me.
Right, and a lot of people are like that. They live in an apartment or are renting a house and they don't want to invest money and time into building these great gardens and then move on. But also I think about people too that are no longer able to get on the ground, that are getting older, that have maybe gardened all their lives and now they've moved to a place where they can't have a garden, or their partner's no longer living and it's too hard to get the garden ready by themselves. And so container gardening is a great idea. And also, you don't have to you can do pretty things in containers, and you can also do vegetables and herbs. Mm-hmm. So I did want to talk a little bit about the fact sheet that we have tons of fact sheets available at facts.okstate.edu, but Casey Hinches and Bruce Dunn wrote a really good fact sheet on container gardening. It's fact sheet HLA 6458, and this fact sheet takes you through the basics of container gardening. It's really neat because it's a short read. It's kind of like if you just went to look at a really good article on container gardening on the internet, but except for this one's aimed at Oklahomans, and it gives tips on how to make container gardens easy, where you're going to put them, how big do they need to be, and what kind of media or soil do you put into them. So it's a really good fact sheet, and I thought we would maybe start out talking about the different types of containers that you could use, what you want to put in there and what sizes, and then how to make a pot look pretty as well.
Yeah, so some of us may be interested in growing vegetables and edible things in a container, and others maybe we're thinking, how do we have that eye-catching feature on our front porch or our balcony? And so we'll talk about both of those things.
Okay, well, and the first thing to think about is it's sun or shade. You have to decide where you're going to put that container. If it's vegetables, it needs to be in the sun. If it's herbs, it needs, at least 6 hours of sun as well. But you could do a real pretty container garden that wasn't vegetables or necessarily herbs, that was in the shade as well. So be thinking about where you're going to put that particular container. And then I think the next thing is probably what's the container going to be and what size are you going to use. I think you can use whatever you have, or you can go out and spend your money on something. You can invest in an expensive pot or expensive pots, or you could use something as simple as a 5-gallon bucket with holes punched in the bottom of it. So it's
I've even seen some really interesting things that are on like the Craigslist free. People are getting rid of things. You sometimes have to be careful with that, but there's some really neat things that you can find and use as containers if you're creative.
Yeah,
you want to have a little bit
I
of
say,
artistic. In
my opinion though, avoid the toilet bowl container.
Yes.
That one should be banned forever. It is kind kind of cute when if you're ever driving out in the country and you see someone's put petunias in that little toilet bowl. You don't see it like you used to, but it used to be real common in country gardens. You would see that. Yeah, they just recycled that when they would put the toilet bowl and put soil in it and put it.
So funny.
It's funny, yeah. So we say avoid that one though. That's our tip for urban gardening. Don't put the toilet bowl in the front yard with the petunias in it. But you can buy almost anything you want, or you can even spend a little bit of money for something really pretty that you'll have for years. That's nice. One thing is remember that they can be super heavy. So if you are one of those people that, you know, part of the reason you're container gardening is once you put the soil in them, they may need to stay where they're at because they get pretty heavy.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and then of course at the very end, I think we'll talk about smart pots at the end of the broadcast. So if you do want to do something pretty, I want to show you a little tip that, or you can find it in the fact sheet, the little tip. What it's called is when you're making a pretty container garden, it's to use a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. And everyone remembers that. It's so easy
I think
to
of
remember.
Michael Jackson's song.
I thought of Thriller too. So, but the thriller is usually the thing that catches your eye.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example of some examples that's from the sheet, are things like grasses or celosia, or any of those really tall, pretty flowers like cleome, or things that are tall. And then the filler could be a geranium or a coleus, and then the spiller is something that would actually go over the side. So here's an example of, if you're on our YouTube watching, I'm sorry, if you're listening to the podcast, we've got a picture that shows you just the different colors and the mixture of colors with the thriller, the filler, and the spiller going over the edge. You don't have to have a picture to imagine that in your mind. Just think of something tall and showy, something that fills the pot, and then something that's gonna run.
It's beautiful.
It's really pretty on that. And then of course tomatoes. If you want to do vegetables, there's no reason why you couldn't just stick a tomato in a pot and grow tomatoes on your patio. Here's some herbs in terracotta pots, and those are fun and easy too. And then this is a vegetable garden that is all in smart pots, which are fabric. We use smart pots a lot these days. They're fairly new to us as gardeners, but they're made of fabric and they breathe and let oxygen into the root system, and plants do really great in them. So those are all different container ideas.
There are a lot of different brands of these fabric containers that you can find online or in different stores, but the actual Smart Pot brand is an Oklahoma City company. So that's a really cool thing if you're here in the Oklahoma City metro where we are.
They're manufactured
here and supporting a local Oklahoma City company.
You can buy them everywhere. You can even buy them online. It's really easy to buy them. The fact sheet on container gardening also gives you some ideas of thrillers, fillers, and spillers. So this is saying ornamental grasses, cannas, Shasta daisy. You could put a banana in there if you wanted. I planted one this summer for my deck that has a bird of paradise in it.
Very cool.
Of course, it's not going to.
So the thriller is really about the height.
Yep. And then the fillers are things like verbena, coleus, lantana. I use a lot of antenna because they're so drought tolerant. And then the spillers are things like sweet potato vines or petunias, or any kind of a sedum that spills over. You know what I've realized is really neat, Josh, is those hardy sedums, when you put them in a pot, they come back. So every year you already have your spiller going over the edge. If you get one of the sedums that trails.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
really pretty, and it makes it easy. I wanted to say something about what you put in the pot, so or in the container. So the ideal mixture really is going to be about 2/3 or 3/4. Let's say 2/3 potting soil and 1/3 compost. You can go a little bit farther on you could go 3 parts potting soil, 1 part compost if you wanted, but 2/3 works as well. The only thing, the more compost you get in there, the more nutrition. And then, so you're feeding your plants when you have a little bit more compost in there.
Now, potting soil and compost is going to be better draining than a native soil, but how important is addressing drainage at the bottom of these potted containers?
It's a good question, and that's the point too about going out and just getting some native soil out of your garden. You could mix some in, I'm not going to lie, and I've done this. A rich garden soil would take the place of of the compost.
Mhm.
You could do that if you had a really rich garden soil because it has a lot of nutrition in it. But if it's that heavy clay or anything else, or really you can't fill the whole pot with garden soil, it's just too heavy and you lose the porosity. There's not enough good drainage. So I think in a big container, you can put things in the bottom of like a really big container. One thing that I've seen people do is empty pop bottles, you know, with the lids on them, and then that takes up that space, and then you put your mixture of potting soil and compost in there. I've also seen people use vermiculite, broken up pots, all kinds of things to fill that bottom and give it really good drainage. But in a, you know, if it's not a gigantic container, and you have the materials to do it, you can just go straight potting soil compost mixture in there.
Okay.
It should be fine. So I say use your imagination, use what you've got. You don't have to spend a lot of money on potting soil, but don't use the cheapest one from the dollar store anyway. Lower quality potting soil is going to have less peat moss in it. Definitely could have just all peat moss, and then you wouldn't have very good drainage. I mean, it would just be it wouldn't retain moisture at all. So get a decent quality of potting soil and mix that with a decent kind of a compost. Do you have a favorite bag to compost?
Oh, there are so many good composts. I tend, when I think about container planting, I tend to prefer plant-based compost as opposed to manure-based most of the time. So I would probably go with a mushroom compost or just some sort of easily accessible, rich organic compost, and then even worm compost. I think it's a little bit more expensive than normal compost, but can be used as a good mix to put in there, or as a top dressing around the base, as a little bit of a mulch almost on the top of the containers.
And then one last tip on the containers too with the media is at the beginning of every year, and this is what I've been doing all spring, is I mix I redress them with a little bit of like a 50% compost, 50% topsoil, and I just add an extra 2 inches to the top because it will compact down in there, and then you just kind of mix those in and then replant into them. You can do it even with the ones that I said that had the overwintering perennials in them, like the sedum, just work around them.
Okay.
And adding that will add some nutrition, and it just feeds that base oil that's in there already. So, and then I did want to kind of just bring up this Strawbed fact sheet that we have. The fact sheet is PSS 2264 Strawbed bed, and the way to it says a way to garden while building the soil. So straw beds do a couple of things, and I know you know about straw beds. We use them here at the garden center. If you want to talk about it.
Sure. So I really like strawbed gardening or strawbed gardening. I've become more familiar with it over the last few years. I've done it a little bit at home, experimented with it, but we've used it here at our extension campus. And one of our master gardeners has done a really great job of helping us pull that off each year, and they have just done so well. Last year we grew some gourds and some hyacinth beans and some other things, and they just took off.
Even the tomatoes did.
The tomatoes did really well in it, and I was quite surprised. And so I would say there are probably a handful of benefits that I could easily name when it comes to straw gardening or strawbed gardening. It's an elevated way to plant, so if you've got
up off the ground,
it's up off the ground. So theoretically, you could do this on concrete side or some sort of pad where you really can't work the soil, real rocky ground.
In a school garden or
in
a church
school garden, a church garden, somewhere, a parking lot even, somewhere that's you just can't work in the soil. You can place these straw bales on top of that surface and have a garden space. Some of the other benefits, they are going to drain a lot more freely than your native soil. So if you do have a really compacted soil, a really poor clay soil, rather than spending lots of money and lots of time trying to remediate and amend that site, you can grow right there and in the straw bales.
And a lot of people will sometimes put them on a new garden bed that they're trying to get the soil better, and then have the strawbed garden there, and then leave it and let it just decompose.
All that organic material as it breaks down is really going to help build soil. It's like composting in place almost.
Yep. It's not as easy as it, I mean, it's not complicated. Anybody can do it if you have the materials, but you don't just get a straw bale, open up a hole and stick your plant in there. It's generally done by opening up the hole and putting some compost in there and or fertilizer and letting it sit long enough to break it down, and then you start planting. But I would highly suggest that anybody who want to try straw bale gardening, you can read about it online, but this fact sheet, this straw bale fact sheet PSS 2264, available on our fact sheet site, is incredible as far as walking you straight through the steps on how to do it.
And I'm pretty sure, I'll link to it in our show notes. I'm pretty sure we have a few Oklahoma gardening videos that Casey has done
great.
that highlight this and show off some of the results. And we'll have to make one here on our straw bale garden.
That sounds good. Yep, yeah, I think so too. So again, all of those fact sheets are available from osufacts.org. Did I say it right? I always
Facts.okstate.edu.
Why do I always do that?
Or osufacts.okstate.edu.
Please say it one more time. osufacts.
You can type in almost any combination and Google will get you there. You can type in OSU fact sheets in a Google search and you'll get there. But the web address is facts.okstate.edu.
You know, I can't do that live on TV. I have to have it right in front of me. So.
Of course, the lights go out on us for you here watching the video.
They never go out, and then they go out.
We have this conference room that we film our YouTube video in, and the lights go out after a certain amount of time, and I have to stand up and wave my hand. So, hello there on YouTube land.
Okay, let's say the fact sheet one more time for people that are just listening. I will let you do it.
Facts.okstate.edu. And again, that's where so many helpful resources are found, and most of the material that we'll bring to you in our podcast and YouTube videos will be featuring material from these fact sheets. They're based in Oklahoma specific information. It's research based, and so it's something that you can pick up and know with confidence that it's going to be pertinent and applicable to the situation that you might find yourself in. And so I really do encourage you to go to that website, search for materials, and you'll find something that will be helpful at making you a more successful gardener. Yeah,
and you could, like you said, just Google Oklahoma State fact sheet on Strawbed Gardening or something. So, yeah, and I think that's a good. This is, just if you. I always used to tell people, if you're intimidated by gardening, get yourself a pot with some potting soil and stick something you've always wanted to grow, a basil plant in there. Put it on your porch, and there you go. Take off.
Yeah. Start with something that is simple, and also start small. I think the biggest mistake that many of us make, I made this mistake, I still make this mistake because I get excited about gardening. I sometimes bite off more than I can chew.
Right.
And I get in the spring, I start buying a bunch of plants for the vegetable garden or whatever, and I put a bunch of stuff out, and it quickly becomes more than I'm able to keep up with, or more than I really had anticipated. And so I think as novice gardeners, the best approach sometimes is just to start small. Start with a few plants, start with a few things, and find success there. Get used to the rhythms of caring for plants, and then just build up as you have the confidence and the success.
And just the opposite, if you've been gardening your whole life, and you're getting older and you're backing away from doing things in the ground, enjoy container gardening. It's easier. It's just easier.
Much easier.
Yeah.
There's so many benefits. So definitely check out those resources that we shared with you. If you're here in the Oklahoma City Metro and you want to swing by our extension office, 2500 Northeast 63rd, we welcome you to kind of take a peek at some of the gardens we have here. And with that, go ahead and hit the bell button or the subscribe button on any of the podcast platforms that you're listening to this on, or on YouTube. That way, when we release new episodes, you can be notified. And so we thank you for listening to us, and we hope that you will continue to stick with us as we bring you relevant and timely content for those of you that are trying to have success gardening in the urban setting.
Very good.
All right, we'll see you next time.